You are now listening to Assets Unscripted. My name is Berend Booms and I am your host. And I'm pleased to be joined here today by Brianna Sylver, who is the founder and president of Sylver Consulting, but also best-selling author of the book Leading Through Freefall: How Innovators Turn Turbulence into Trust. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Oh, I am fantastic. And I so appreciate the invitation to be here with you and your audience today. Thank you so much.
It's going to be a fun one. I can feel it. So first things first, for those listeners that might not know who you are, might not have read your book yet, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do for your consulting firm, but also what prompted you to write this book?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so my name is Brianna Sylver, as Berend said, and what I do is I run Sylver Consulting, innovation research and strategy firm, on a day-to-day basis. So we work with Fortune 500 organizations, really helping them to chart the future for themselves, figure out where do they want to go and what's the pathway to get there. We perform both qualitative and quantitative research in support of that and really specialize in activating those insights into next step actions for organizations. In terms of leading through freefall, how that came to be is after, roughly 20 years of consulting work, one of the things that I always saw happen is that people had really strong, or I would say, they had spoken intention for making change, yet when it came to actually making the change and putting the behaviors behind those words, that was not always happening. There was an activation gap. And so leading through freefall is all about it's really providing frameworks and tools for how do you close that gap between intent and action.
Right. That's a lovely premise, and I can see the book is right there behind you. So this is my chance to say to everyone listening, make sure that you pick up the book, give it a read. It's very good. Now, one of the things that I appreciate that comes through in that book as well, and we spoke about this in one of our earlier conversations, is your view on superpowers. And you said something that has stuck with me for a while now. You said that clarity is my superpower, and I just think that's so interesting because I come from a family where I have two young sons, and we often play pretend in my house. And one of our favorite things to do is we pretend that we're superheroes. And then when I approach this from the perspective of my children, they always want to mimic. They want to be one of those superheroes. They want to be Spider-Man. They want to be Superman. Yeah. But then if I look at it from my perspective, I get to pick my superpower, right? I get to be whoever I want and do whatever I want. And I think that concept is so fascinating. Now you have that superpower. Clarity is your superpower. Tell me about how you found out about your superpower, what it means to you, and what it enables you to do.
Yeah, I love this question. So first, I'm going to actually start with just, the basis and the philosophical belief underneath this. And so it is my perspective that, each of us is unique. We've each been brought here to the world for a purpose, and therefore we each have a gift to give to the world. And it might be more than one, but, we have gifts that make us uniquely us. Now, the thing is you got to figure out what that thing is, right? So there is a tool in the book. It's called the Core Value Offer. And this is basically how you go about finding your superpower. Now, years ago, maybe going back about 15 years ago, I was able to go through this tool for myself and ultimately defined clarity. But what was happening at that moment, kind of before I found my own superpower of clarity, is, like many leaders, had a lot of imposter syndrome, right. Questioned myself, had a lot of doubt, certainly spent a lot of time in comparative energy, like, well, so-and-so is doing this, maybe I should try to be like them, etc. And none of that makes anybody feel good.
No, no.
It always makes you feel terrible, yeah. Right? And so, through some encouragement from my own mentor, she said, I really think you need to figure out what makes you uniquely you. And so what I first started doing is I just said, let me just longhand journal. Some of the times in my life when I have felt really, fully on, right? Like I am in my element, everything is clicking and flowing and it's just beautiful. And I, didn't put any kind of, guardrails around it in terms of, professional or personal, whatever. I just, where have I felt my best?
Right.
And then I spent time just journaling about those experiences holistically. So, what was happening? Who was I with? How were people reacting? What was the energy in the room? Whatever it may be, right?
Mm.
And so wrote longhand, just pages and pages of content. And then I took that content, so I did that on one day and then just sort of left it. Then I came back to it another day with a fresh head for, different lens. And I just read through all of those pages. And I started circling, or highlighting the things that really stood out to me.
Mm.
And the goal here was just looking at the patterns, looking for the patterns of what was really, kind of calling out as unique and sort of really fueled and fed my soul in a meaningful way. And then once I got through that, then I was like, okay, if I were to attach one word to these
Mm.
things, what would that one word be? And I can't recall now what it was, but initially I tried on a different word.
Right.
And then as I kind of went through my life over the course of the following couple days, was like, yeah, this word is not really hitting it,
Mm.
So then I came back to that and I said, okay, let me give it another word, right? And I think, the second or third try is when I finally got to clarity. And then that was just super eye-opening for me
Mm.
because what was happening to me and in my career at that time, because I'm an external consultant, right? I kind of come into places
Nope.
and there's a lot of conversation usually that has happened before I've gotten there.
Mm.
Conversations, even if we're in an engagement, conversations that are happening that I'm not part of those conversations. And so there's multiple times that I would censor what I would say because
Mhm.
I would be like, why is no, my the thoughts in my head would be like, why is nobody saying this? Like this
Right.
kind of
Right.
like feels like a no duh, like no brainers
Yep.
sort of like,
Yep.
why are we circling here, right? Like the
Mm.
answer is X, like, and it would be so clear in my head, but I would censor what I would share back because I'd be like, well, somebody's got to have said
Yeah.
that before, and I'm going to look stupid if I say it now, right?
Yep.
But as soon as I landed on clarity, then I realized, no, Brianna, not everybody sees it the way
Mm.
that you see it. Like
Mm.
that is your gift, that is your value. And so what I started doing is taking those moments where I would, those little negative thoughts would start taking hold in my head. And I would take those as cues and signals to lean forward and state whatever was on my mind.
Yep.
And, initially that was like super anxiety riddled, right?
Of
Like the
course.
temperature goes up, the blood pressure goes up, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so then, to help me sort of get over that hump and sort of change that perspective, I also started tracking in my, work journal.
Mhm.
Okay, this is where I'm going to make this bold, statement, if you
Yep.
will.
Yep.
They weren't even necessarily super bold statements, but in my head, they were super
Mhm.
bold statements, right? But I'm going to make this bold statement. And then I just started tracking. How did people respond? And literally I only had to do that for a few weeks before I was like,
Yep.
this is what I meant to do, right? Like I see things clearly. I meant to step forward and share my perspective. Maybe it lands, maybe it doesn't, but it
Mhm.
certainly doesn't hurt me
Right.
professionally to
Right.
stand in this strength. And so, that was my own personal journey through this, right? And then, for a while I was, one of the other things that I do is I do clarity coaching for
Mhm.
other leaders. And so this is kind of more of like leadership based training. And so I started having all of my clients through that program go and do this core value offer exercise for themselves. Every member of Sylver Consulting, when they join our team, have to do it as an onboarding
That's awesome.
exercise. And of course, now that the book is out there, many other people are taking advantage of doing it
Mhm.
as well. And what it does is it just liberates you. It
Yep.
says, okay, this is my superpower, and this is how I am uniquely made and what I'm uniquely made to do for others. And so it's very liberating when you can stand in that with a really strong and confident stance.
Yeah, and just take it in. I mean, it's such a lovely feeling, isn't it? To figure out, hey, this is what I'm meant to be doing. This really works, not only just for me, but it also helps the others around me, whether that's the employees of your consultancy firm or the projects that you work on, the organizations that you engage with. you help them find that progress. It's fantastic. And there's something else that you said, which I really appreciate. It is that feeling of, isn't this glaringly obvious? Should I really say this out loud? I don't want to look stupid. I recently wrote an article about asking the dumb questions, and I was inspired to do so by someone that I follow in the space. And I think it's this idea that we rather not look silly and not ask the thing or say the thing, versus the opposite, where the real learning and the real progress that you can create comes from speaking your mind, asking that question, whether that's a smart question or a quote unquote dumb question, it doesn't matter. To further that conversation and further the discussion, you need people that are willing to open their mind, open their mouth, and open their heart and speak what's sort of on their tongue. And I think that's a really important sentiment. So I'm really happy that you notice the same. From your experience, obviously you have this mindset, you have this clarity that you can apply, but you also get to meet a lot of these organizations that they're starting to define a vision, they come up with a strategy, but there's no action, right? So they're sort of stuck in this limbo of, we know what needs doing, but we're not doing it. What is it that sort of breaks down between having that vision and actually mobilizing your team or cross-functional teams and departments to get together, to align better, to see the common values, the common objectives, and also commit and stay accountable to whatever roadmap it is that they want to roll out?
Yeah, I know. I was actually just having a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, because that is the common thing, right? Visions and goals and growth goals are stated. And then the mobilization of the teams against those goals oftentimes is quite lackluster.
Yep.
And I think there's a couple different things associated with that. Like, one is just sort of, a change management issue, like not, kind of helping people to understand, okay, this is our goal and this is what this looks like at a department level in terms of how each department is supporting that business goal, and then down to each employee within that department level for it. Like that level of like according out the goals and sort of like laddering the goals, that doesn't happen in most places.
Yep.
And it's not that people can't actually do it. They just don't take the time to do it. To say, okay, if this is our big organizational goal, this is how X department is supporting that, and this is how Berend within that department is supporting that, right? And so I think that's a big miss for one. But another big piece of this, and actually I think is probably really relevant to the assets community, is that oftentimes, like, every change that you want to make is really an adaptive leadership challenge. And so in the science of adaptive leadership, it basically says that every problem is comprised of technical issues and then adaptive issues, which is ultimately people issues, right? So when you're talking about technical issues, they're fairly concrete. It's like, oh, we need a new system, we need a new software, we need a new this or that. Like, it's less about challenge in that, and it's more about, do you have the resources to put towards it, right? Like, it's just, do you have enough money? Are your systems set up to support it? But it's like, they're fairly concrete and simple tools, or simple questions to be answered. The piece that's not so simple is all the adaptive challenges. And these are all the workflow changes that have to happen, the process changes, maybe the policy changes, the redistribution of work versus sort of just this notion of just continuing to pile on. Certainly then also the resistance that comes up in that process of like, we're seeing this, incredibly in the world that we live in today with AI, where, people are scared that their job won't exist tomorrow, right? So when the organization comes in and says, hey, we're going to be doing this whole new AI revamp, everybody's like, okay, I kind of want to be part of this because I have to be part of this. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired. But if I'm really part of this, I also might be getting fired, right? And so that's another whole adaptive leadership challenge. And what ends up happening, and I mean, this is like literally happens everywhere, is that everybody rushes to the technical challenges and tries to avoid, depress, dismiss all the adaptive challenges. And that's because the adaptive challenges are hard. Like,
Yep.
you can't just make a decision top down and say, do it. You have to kind of bring people along in that journey. And
Mm.
you really need to give people the space to have a voice and help to co-create that future.
Yep.
And when you do that, that's when they become on board. And so
Mm.
that's what Leading Through Freefall is all about. It's these different tools to really support meeting people where they are in that change experience, and then helping them to have that voice and co-create the solutions with them. And
Mm.
then what happens is that then you really have major acceleration towards changing things. The technical challenges, they just become more easily dealt with. And then you have more success and impact because the people are truly behind the change that you're trying to make happen.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting perspective, and it's something that I've seen definitely in the asset space, but also in sort of other industries. And I want to sort of latch onto what you just said, because the bits and pieces that I've read of Leading Through Freefall, what you do is you describe change as being something that people experience through a curve, right? A grief curve
Hmm.
almost, where it goes through resistance, there's anger, there's depression, and eventually you get to this level of acceptance, as we were just discussing, where people go, well, I don't really want to do this, but I can see why it would be important to, secure my job, and it's in the best interest of the organization. And they sort of get on board, but not really. But given this sentiment of going through this grief curve almost,
Hmm.
how should leaders that are dealing with change look at their role when it's not, as you say, only a technical implementation, but it is very much an emotional journey that
Yeah.
you need to understand, you need to acknowledge, you need to help yourself and others navigate accordingly.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that leaders need to just acknowledge is that it is their job to lead the emotional energy of themselves, the teams, and the stakeholders that they are engaging with on a daily
Mm.
basis. I think just that level, that first level of awareness is not there for most, right? It's like,
Yep.
my job is X, I am hired to do process Y, and so I do that, and the people are part of it. But depending upon the person, with varying degrees of caring about
Yep.
those
Yep.
people around them, right? And the reality is that you are leading, through any initiative that you are doing of any scale.
Mhm.
It is also your job to lead the emotional energy of the people that you are engaging in that journey with you. Now, when you start talking about major change and transformation, when you start to use those words specifically,
Mhm.
that call to manage the emotional energy becomes even more amped up.
Absolutely.
Because one of the key things that was like a major aha for me throughout my consulting career, then certainly became an acute focus for me as I started to write Leading Through Freefall, is that, as you said, there is a change curve and it looks a lot like a grief curve.
Mhm.
And so, this is documented science through Kubler-Ross, but basically the very first step on that change curve is resistance. So if you
Mm.
think about grief denial, it takes the form of resistance
Right.
when it comes to change. And then you go into even more negative energy, which
Mhm.
is around anger, right? And so the way that this looks like in a business context is you've got leaders saying, I don't think we really need to do anything. I'm irritated that you would even bring that forward. Well, who said we have to do this, right? Like, and it gets into more of like this entitled energy, if
Right.
you will. And then you get into bargaining where it's like, well, okay, I guess if we need to make some change, maybe we could just make an incremental change. And that's going to like radically,
Mhm. Mhm.
change everything that we want to have happen
Yeah.
here. Right. And then when they realize that marginal, sort of minute change is not going to actually do it, then they get into this space of feeling overwhelmed and defeated. And, this is the depressive state of that grief
Mhm.
curve until they finally get to the point where they're like, okay, I get that a change needs to happen.
Yeah.
I get that I need to be behind this change. And then they finally get to that hopeful, sort of motivated energy to make to make the change happen.
Mm.
So all of this is not necessarily super pleasant, obviously, right? You have to go through 4 stages of negative before you get to the
Sure.
positive. Now, as a leader, if you accept it that it is your responsibility to lead the emotional energy of yourself, your team, and your stakeholders,
Mhm.
then you just know as we start this new initiative, there's likely to be resistance. How do I proactively be ahead of that resistance?
Mm.
How do I reactively embrace that resistance with grace versus, kind of avoidance, if you will? And so, that's where Leading Through Freefall comes in,
Mm.
is it has distinct frameworks that help you to meet people where they are on this grief slash change curve, so that they can let go of what was
Mm.
and bring and let in what will be, right? So
Yeah.
that's why the change curve looks like a grief curve, is because you have to let something die
Yeah.
before you can let something else be reborn. And so, in the world in which we're living, where everything is running so fast paced and it's getting even faster with AI,
Mhm.
the reality is that people can still not, they still can't metabolize information and make change faster than what is humanly possible. And
Right.
that's going to look different, like
Sure.
everybody travels this change curve. Sometimes it'll happen in 30 seconds.
Mm.
Other times it's going to take 18 months or longer, right? And it's going
Sure.
to also be different based on the individual and how comfortable they are just naturally with ambiguity and
Mhm.
uncertainty. And, from a project and initiative level, it's going to depend on the scale of that. If it's a
Yeah.
relatively small change, okay, it's going to be a quick travel of that curve. If it's a pretty massive organizational based change, you're in for a long haul. And we
Mm.
all want to assume it's just going to happen super quickly. Nothing ever happens at the pace
No,
we want it to happen,
that's true.
right? Like it's just human life. But when you can just take these moments of pause and realize, okay, this is where we are
Mm.
and this is where we need to be right now, instead of like being so focused on the outcome but being
Mm.
focused on the process, then you ultimately get to an outcome that is better, and you ultimately get to an outcome that has more influence and impact for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so a moment of reflection, I think that's really worthwhile. There's something else that came to mind for me, which is I've held roles in change management before. It's this sort of assumption that people have that change by definition is positive. And I challenge that a lot because not
Hmm.
every change is for the better. There are certain changes, they just need to happen. And the
Yep.
faster we can accept this, the easier it becomes to sort of move past this. But I really like what you said about something has to die before something else can emerge, right? We need that space. We need to open up and allow those emotions and those feelings to pass through ourselves before we can get the clarity again of mind to see what the benefit and the outcome is going to be like. Now, in this assumption, something needs to die before something else can emerge. What is it that good leaders do in identifying where they should focus their energy, right? What is it that they let die off? Or where do they divert attention to get the most maximum sort of best benefit, best result for their organization?
Yeah, I think where you're headed with this is, there's a lot of noise, and
Hmm.
you've got to be able to parse the noise, the signal from the noise,
Oh yeah.
in the world in which we're living. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that, but generally speaking, I think it can be very easy to get sucked into the day-to-day things that
Hmm.
feel urgent, but they're not actually moving forward your team, your department, your organization at large.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I personally do, and this is I don't know, maybe it's a practice that I started about 2 years ago, and it's been a huge benefit for me, is that every year I create goals for myself, and those are a bit of they're a mix of business as well as then personal goals. And so what I do every single day is I have a practice of journaling in the morning,
Hmm.
that is like super important to me, just to kind of center and ground me on a day-to-day basis. But the end of that practice is I basically say, because in my journaling practice, it's a conversation with God daily.
Mhm.
But I will say, okay, what is, related to, goal A, what are the key activities that I need to do and prioritize today, right? And I'll just like let whatever kind of flows out onto the paper.
Mm.
And then I'll go to goal B and ask the same, and goal C and ask the same. And then I kind of have a miscellaneous category. So this year I have 4 goals, right? All right, 3 goals rather. So then I have a miscellaneous category. And so then it's like a huge laundry list. And because of course, we're all so overachieving and high achieving, there's always way more things on that
Of
list
course.
than I could ever possibly
Mhm.
achieve in a single day,
That's right.
right? So then I go back to those lists, and I really then just kind of read back through them, and I highlight the one thing on each of those lists
Mhm.
that is the most important thing to happen for the day.
Right. Right.
And that practice has been super beneficial to me because one, it has made sure that I am focusing on the things that I have said that matter to me, which are basically
Mhm.
those 3 goals in this year. And it's making sure that I make traction towards them on a daily basis.
Mm.
And if I'm not consistently, that's a question, right?
Yeah.
Like and sometimes it's like, okay, why are you resisting this thing, Brianna?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And it's more of like an inner dialogue with myself to get clear, again, bringing back that clarity, right? To
Mhm.
get clear about what is it that is standing in the way? Is it something that I'm shoulding myself on, in the sense that I should do this, I should care about this, but I
Yep.
really don't care about it,
Yep.
and I need to be honest about that? Or is it, something else, right? But I have found that practice to be really great in the sense of moving forward the things that really do matter to me.
Mhm.
And I've also found it to just be really valuable to me as a leader, and just making sure that sort of like I'm managing my own energy and
Right.
anxiety about things, because like for me this year, there's really like one goal that is for the business,
Mhm.
and then 2 goals that are more personally oriented.
Mhm.
And prior to starting this practice, I am definitely one of those individuals who would like say that the personal stuff was important,
Mhm.
but not
But live
necessarily.
the
I
life.
would always second I would always deprioritize that
Mhm.
against the business goals,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so this has helped me to maintain and create that focus and balance.
That's great. I mean, that level of personal reflection and having that introspection to answer some of those tougher questions, because they're not easy questions to answer by any means. It really helps you progress in your understanding and the ability to also apply the same to your work and to business. So I appreciate that perspective a lot. And while you were mentioning all of these things, I started to think, hey, how do I approach change? And one of the things that I usually do is I question the change itself because of the way
Mhm.
it's always been done, right? Something
Yeah.
needs to change, but why? Because we've always been doing it for 5, 10, 20 years in a particular way. Why change now? And it's it instantly creates resistance, doesn't it? So I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you, how do you overcome this resistance where people start to question, why do we need to change now? We've always done it this way. How do you create a more sort of constructive and healthy dialogue where on the one hand, you're showing them this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to change, and people are questioning the validity based on sort of the historical record of we have done this for 25 years in this way. Why change now?
Yeah, so you said something earlier on in the conversation that I think is important related to this, right? In the sense that there's this general assumption or sort of worldview that change is
Mhm.
always good.
Right.
Um, and change can come with blind spots too,
Mhm.
right? And it can come with ego.
For
Somebody could
sure.
just want to change something because, hey, now they're in power and
Oh yeah.
they just want to, put their mark on something, right? And it doesn't need changing. But oftentimes you're kind of thrown into change,
Mhm.
regardless of. Not all. I guess sometimes you can choose it, but a lot of probably more times than not, we're thrown into it
Right.
than choosing it, right? But one of the ways that I support organizations to kind of process change is through a framework called the treasure, trash, hope, fear. And so anytime you're going to be doing something, so let's say, going back to a process that's been going on for 5 years, but now it feels like there needs to be a change. And maybe there needs to be legitly a change because like sales have gone down, or, maybe the supplier you had before is no longer, in business, whatever it may be, right? But you're in the position of needing to make that change. The treasure, trash, hope, fear framework is one that a team can go through in about 30 minutes or so. But you come together and you say, okay, what are the things that we want to treasure about this past experience? So let's just take the supplier, for instance. Like,
Right.
what do we want to treasure about this past supplier relationship? Like, what have we really valued about it? What have we really found that has been very beneficial in working with our team, our company, et cetera, right? So you kind of put all that down on paper. Then you say, okay, what would we want to trash or discard? Like, because now we do have a place where we can chart the future however we want it, because who you are today as an organization is different than who you were 5 years ago when you got into relationship with that supplier, for instance, right? So what would you want to trash about that relationship, or sort of discard, not continue into the new one? And that could be anything about that particular supplier. It could be something around, the interactions that they had with your team. It could be a variety of different things. So these are things that that you have experienced before, and you either have a positive or a negative, sentiment related to those. Then the hope is, okay, now that we are in this position of needing to change, maybe we didn't want it, maybe we didn't ask for it, but now that we are, what would we hope for the good to come out of this, right? Like, what do we hope this is going to support our organization to do that maybe we didn't even think was possible, or you didn't even have in the realm of our thinking, 2 weeks ago when we found out this thing was happening, right? And then the fear is like, okay, what are some of the fears and the concerns that we have about, going back out into the market to find a new supplier, bringing a new supplier into our systems, whatever it may be. What are those fears and concerns? And so by just bringing that level of conversation around the idea of needing to change a supplier in this case, it takes it from feeling like it's a firestorm that needs to be addressed, right? To being like, it gives you that moment to give a strategic pause, to just think about it holistically.
Yep.
And then, once you kind of allow the space for the negatives to be discharged and for the positives to kind of well up, then you can start to see it from a different angle. It doesn't mean that you might not still have remorse or grief over the fact that you're going to lose this supplier, but it gives you a sense of like, it gives you first, again, that clarity of like, what exactly do you need in that new supplier?
Yep.
Who would make the ideal supplier for you at this moment in the course of the business? And it gives you then the requirements to then start to go out into the market to find that person with intention, or find that organization with intention. It gives you clarity for how to go into those interviews in a way that you're making sure that you're fully assessing, are they going to deliver in that way? And so all of this becomes super intentional versus the way organizations typically do it, that say, oh, we're going to lose our supplier that we've had for 5 years. Let's pull out the RFP that we sent out 5 years ago and just get that out into the market right now, right? And they haven't even stopped to pause to say, how have we changed in the last 5 years? And therefore, what do we need new and different than what we needed 5 years ago?
And it's such an interesting change to behold as well, because usually when something changes, as you say, you go through this curve of grief. You're sort of grieving that loss. You're sort of upset about it. But what this exercise does, my sort of layman's take on it anyway, is it puts you back in action mode. You're now thinking about, what do I need to do? What do I want to address? What do I want to get out of this? What do I want to change that was not in place before? And I want to see change for the next vendor or the next supplier, whatever that change entails. So it's really interesting to think about how an exercise like this can put you in this completely different mindset when it comes, and it certainly helps with accepting the change as well, because you're sort of going through that curve and you're up here accepting and taking the appropriate steps and appropriate actions.
Yeah.
that's a wonderful insight. Thank you so much. I have one more question because you had mentioned something that I think is really relevant for the space that I operate in, artificial intelligence. And sort of the onset has already begun, but we're still looking at artificial intelligence as this wonderful potential technology that is going to revolutionize the way we work. And especially in some of the more heavy labor intensive, asset intensive industries, you can imagine that having robotics, but also AI agents partake within your workflows offers tremendous potential. But what I've seen is a lot of these initiatives where the technology itself is sound, it works, right, on paper, but then actually what it starts to do is it doesn't take into consideration the sort of operational environment, and it certainly doesn't take into consideration the human system within which it needs to operate and within which it needs to provide that value and the output that is expected of it. So yeah, especially in this era of AI, AI being everywhere, how do we make sure that the human is in the driver's seat, but we also get the highest potential output from these technological advancements?
Yeah, I think this actually takes a nod back to that adaptive leadership conversation that we had a little bit ago.
Mm,
One of the processes that I speak about in the book, and one that we do frequently in our consulting business at Sylver Consulting, is we support prototyping and testing.
mm,
And I think a lot of times organizations are embracing, AI agents and just sort of the adaption of the technology as as something that's happening in a silo,
mm.
devoid of thinking about the humans that are in the system, as you just said, right?
Yep.
And so, what this prototyping and testing process looks like, kind of talk through it at a broad level, because I think it could be a good roadmap for your audience as they, think about how to bring more AI
Mm,
into their workflows. So, first thing is you say, okay, what is that AI engine or agent that we would want, right? Like,
mm,
what do we want it to do? What's the workflow and process it's going to improve? How do we think it's going to improve it, et cetera? And so we encourage people to run an assumptions-based workshop. The framework for how to do that is in the book. But basically, what that assumption-based workshop is doing is it's helping people to say, okay, this is what we think that this AI agent in this
mm,
case is going to do. And so you're really bringing voice to all of the assumptions that you have related around, what this new technology is going to enable for your organization. And so usually if you go through those processes, you get down to, I don't know, 26 to hundreds of assumptions that are
yes.
being made, some that have been explicitly stated up to this point, others that have been, sort of implicit in things. And then you map those assumptions to a 2x2 diagram. And so one axis is how critical is this assumption to the success of the AI agent in this
Mhm, mhm,
situation, right? Versus how not, so it's critical, not critical to the success of this thing. And then the other is like, how certain are we that this assumption is actually true? So like 100% certain or, 0% certain, right?
mhm,
And and so you critically look at each assumption and you map it to that 2x2. And then ultimately you look at all the assumptions that are in that critical to success. And we're somewhere between 0 to 50% certain
mhm,
that this assumption is true. And then what you do is you develop test and learns around those items.
mm,
And, usually you need a couple rounds, but your basic, and so the goal is not to necessarily go build the whole AI agent and see how it
mhm,
works. And it's not to like, full on implementation mode, but how do we run little experiments to essentially test whether what we think is going to happen is going to happen.
right.
And what that does is it allows you, one, to then keep the human in the loop,
Mhm,
because a lot of the things that you're going to be uncertain about are the things of how are the people going to be
yeah,
interacting around that, right? Just inherently. But then you're also empowering the people in your organization to be to really support that change. Like you're
mhm,
engaging them in the technological revolution instead of just handing it to them and saying, now do this,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And so there's a real empowering notion of that. And then just from a pure business perspective, like what happens is incredible because now you are really making sure you're de-risking the development of that AI agent in this case. And it's, that's probably the small fraction, right? It's about how it then goes into the rest of your operations, but you're de-risking that whole process majorly in making sure that you're shaping that new initiative to really unleash, major impact and influence within your organization. Now, most people don't do this. They say, hey, we have this idea. We're going to go build it. You've got people calling, reaching out to you daily who says they can, develop an AI agent for this or that, right? And then it's like they go do it. And then they say to the people in the ranks, all right, now you got to use it. I was at a conference like a week or two ago. And my gosh, some of the founders at this conference were saying, like, if their people do not, use all of their Claude credits, like they're firing them for not doing that. Like, and, I understand the sentiment of, hey, you got to get on the train, but I don't think that sort of top down, punitive way of approaching it is the right way to approach it. But if you take more of a test and learn cycle associated with it, it will feel at the outset that maybe you're going slightly slower than you want. But in terms of where you end up, it's going to be massively different. And I think, I go back so often to that story of the turtle and the hare, right? Like the turtle is slow, but they are the ones that cross the finish line. And that is where we are, is this: when you take the moment to be intentional, it may in that moment feel as though you are slowing down, but you are accelerating the cohesion and the collaboration and the impact of your work so much by just taking a second to pause.
Yeah, and that's worth so much. I mean, as you say, the empowerment, getting people aligned to the same. I think a lot of people still live by this notion that AI is some sort of silver bullet, but it's not. Although coincidentally, Silver Bullet would be a very cool superhero name, would it not? So we're back to that superhero theme. But yeah, it's looking at AI, but also understanding what those use cases are going to bring within the context of those operations with the people that actually have to use them, and not in isolation. I don't think it creates value in isolation. It needs to create value in sort of the agreement and the collaboration within which it takes place. But since we're back on that superhero theme, I have one final question for you. I now know what your superpower is, right? It's clarity. Assume that you are clairvoyant. You have all the knowledge in the world. What is the one blind spot that you see that leaders have today? The one thing they constantly do, the one pattern that if they were to address it, would unlock sort of a disproportionate amount of progress, sort of a compounding effect for them?
It is really giving them the permission to take a strategic pause.
I love that.
That is the thing that I think prevents most people from being able to see what is in front of them. And it's on two levels. One is, sometimes you just get so into the thick of it, you can't see the forest through the trees anymore. And that strategic pause just gives you the ability to zoom back out and be able to see the bigger picture to what you're trying to do. And then, the other part is that also helps you to stay centered and grounded to say, where do I really want to go? And is the way in which I'm directing my energy today and the priorities of my teams, is that supporting those goals, or is it actually hindering? Because I think in a lot of ways we are hardwired as individuals to do everything opposite to what is helping us achieve. And so by just taking a moment to take a strategic pause and really investing in yourself in that way. And this could be minor. I mean, you could be talking about 10 minutes a day.
Of course, yeah.
Could really make a massive impact for not only your impact as an individual, but your joy as you go through life as an individual as well.
Absolutely. And I love that advice. So let's end on those words of wisdom. Take a pause. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Thank you so much for your great insights, Brianna. This is the end of this episode of Assets UNSCRIPTED. Assets UNSCRIPTED is hosted on our website, futureofassets.com. And the website is created in partnership with both IFS and Ultimo. Thank you for listening. As always, we look forward to you tuning in to the next one.